everyone, this is Dr. Vishal Trivedi from Department of Biosciences and Bioengineering, IIT Guwahati. And what we were discussing about the basic properties of the living organism. And in this context, so far we have discussed about the many aspects of the living organisms. And in the couple of previous module, we are discussing about the human physiology. And in the human physiology, so far what we have discussed about the digestion, and then we have, once you have the digestion, you are actually going to generate the different types of nutrients, right? And once you have the different types of nutrients, these nutrients has to be supplied to the different parts of the body, right? So this is going to be the function of the circulatory system. So circulatory system is required for distributing the nutrients to the different parts of the body. So in the today's lecture, we are going to start discussing about the circulatory system. So as we discussed, circulatory system is actually going to be required for transporting the gases, nutrients. It is going to collect the waste from the different cells, and it's also going to distribute the hormones. Apart from that, the circulatory system is also going to uh, transport the neurotransmitters, okay, which is actually going to transmit the signal from the one part of the body to another part. So if you want to perform these functions, you require a system so that you can be able to circulate the liquid within the body, and then you also require the tubes. So remember that when you are actually want to do this in your home, right? For example, if you want to circulate the water into the home, right? So what you do is you are actually going to take up the water, and then you are pumping that water into the water tank, right? Similar to that, in the human body also, you require a pump. So you require a heart, which is actually a pump, so that you can be able to circulate the fluid throughout the body. And then you also require a system of blood vessels. So blood vessels are actually going to mimic the pipe through which you are actually going to throw the water in your home, and the heart is actually going to function as the pump. So pump is actually going to take up the water or take up the blood from the one part of the body, and it is actually going to throw into the other part, and that's how it is actually going to keep circulating the fluid throughout the body. And while it is circulating the fluid, it will actually going to do many functions. For example, the heart is actually going to circulate the fluid to the different parts, right? So when this fluid will go, this fluid is going to carry the different types of gases like the CO2, carbon dioxide and all that, and it is going to circulate it is going to have the nutrients. So once it suppose reaches to a particular organ, this organ is actually going to take up the carbon dioxide, oxygen and the nutrients, and in return the organ is actually going to give the different types of gases like the metabolic byproduct. So it's actually going to give the carbon dioxide, and it is going to give the waste material, and that waste material is actually going to heart is actually going to carry that waste material, and then it is actually going to give the waste material to the different other types of organ, and ultimately it is going to again bring the liquid back to the heart, and that cycle will continue, and that's how the heart is actually going to circulate the fluid throughout the body, and that's how it is actually going to make the exchange of the different types of material, whether it is the gases like the oxygen and the carbon dioxide, or whether these are the nutrients like the different types of nutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, nucleic acids, or their monomeric constituents is actually going to be circulated, and along with that it is actually going to start collecting the waste from the different parts of the body, and these waste are actually going to be excreted out through the kidney, and that also we are going to discuss when we are going to discuss about the homeostasis. So if you want to do this, you can actually have the two ways of doing it, okay? You can have the open system or you can have the closed system, and that's how the circulatory system in the different organisms what we have discussed so far could be of two different types. It could be an open system like the so animals do have a circulatory system of two different kinds. You can have the open system. The fluid is circulated through an open body chamber, right? In this, the heart is actually going to pump the liquid, okay, or the fluid, right? And that fluid will go into a cavity, and from the cavity the fluid will return back to this. So this is called as the open system, whereas we can have the closed system where the fluid is circulated through the blood vessel, which means from the heart the fluid is circulated through the blood vessels, okay, and because of that the closed system is going to be more efficient compared to the open system. And that's why the all the higher organisms are actually having the closed systems. So let's discuss about these different types of system, what is present in the different types of organisms. When we talk about the open system, the arthropoda and most of the molluscas have the open circulatory system. So this is what you see here is arthropoda. You have this is what you see here is a insect, right? And in the insect, what you see here is a body cavity which is called as the hemocoel, and the liquid what is present in this is called as the hemolymph. And so, and then it also has the different types, it has the heart, right? So, what you see here is actually the pumping system, which is not the real heart what we discussed or what we are going to discuss, but it's going, these are the muscular chambers which are actually going to have the ability to pump the liquid. And once the liquid comes out from the heart, it actually falls into this cavity which is called as the hemocoel, and then from the hemocoel the liquid enters into the heart again. So these are the actually going to have the the heart which are actually going to have the opening. So the hemolymph is contained in a body cavity which is called as the hemocoel, and then the it has a series of heart which circulates the fluid. But as I said, it is actually going to have the less efficient because the collection of the blood fluid from the cavity and then the leakage of the fluid from the heart is actually going to be less efficient compared to the closed system. Whereas in the closed system is present in the most of the vertebrates, annelids, and the few mollusks also have the closed circulatory system. In a closed circulatory system, blood is moved through the blood vessel by the heart's action, and it does not come in direct contact with the body organs. So what you see here is the different types of heart, right? So you see the 1, 2, 3, 4 hearts, and once the heart is pumping the liquid, it is going through into the blood vessels, and that's how the blood vessels are actually transporting the blood or the fluid throughout the body, and then ultimately they are actually transmitting this liquid into the different organs without having the direct contact, which means at the end the blood capillaries or the blood vessels are actually going to form the blood capillaries, and the blood capillaries the nutrients or the gases are actually going to diffuse and reach to the final destinations. So what you see here is it has the blood vessels like the ventral vessels or the dorsal vessels. It has the different types of hearts, and then it also has the smaller vessels or the capillaries, and these smaller vessels and capillaries are actually going to diffuse out the nutrients or the gases to the final organs. So the closed system is more efficient compared to the open system because of the same reason that the blood is going to move through the blood vessels, and that's how there will be no loss of pressure, there will be no loss of liquid. So what are the different components of a circulatory system? So when we talk about the circulatory system, uh, circulatory system, as I said, circulatory system should have the three components. One, you can actually have a pump, right? So the pump is, in this case, it's heart, right? Which is actually going to be required for circulating the liquid, right? And how it is going to circulate the liquid? It is actually should also have the pipe, right? So pipe is actually the blood vessels, and the blood vessels also could be of different types. So you require a pump, you require a pipe, and then the third component is that you also require a fluid which is actually going to transport within this pipe, right? So fluid is, in this case, is the blood, right? So blood is actually the major fluid which is going to be circulated throughout the body, and that's how the fluid is actually going to carry all the material, right? So this fluid is should be compatible with the all the different types of material, like it should be able to carry the gases, it should be able to carry the waste, okay? And so what we are going to discuss, we are going to first discuss about the structure of the pump, right, which means the structure of the heart. Then we are going to discuss about the structure of the pipe, which means that we are going to discuss about the different types of blood vessels. And then we also going to discuss about the fluid, like the blood, and how what are the different functions of the blood, and as well as the function of the different organs. So let's first start the discussing about the machinery, that is the pump as well as the pipe. Now, when we talk about the pump could be of different types. I'm sure when you go to the any electrical shops, you always have the different variety of the water pumps, right? You can also have the same way in the heart also. You can actually have the different types of pumps, and all these pumps are being evolving because the the different types of organisms. Okay, I'm sure we have discussed when we're discussing about the classification, that we have the two-chambered heart, we have three-chambered heart, we have the four-chambered heart. So the simplest is the two-chambered heart. So the simplest vertebrate heart is the two-chambered heart, which is mostly being found in the fishes. So in a two-chambered heart, we have the single atrium which receives the blood from the body cells, and then we actually have the single ventricles which sends the blood to the gills to collect the oxygen. So this is what the single two-chambered heart, where you have the single atrium which is going to send the blood to the different parts of the body, or which is actually going to receive the blood from the different parts of the body. And then we also have the single ventricles which is actually going to throw the liquid or throw the blood to the gill capillaries, so that the blood whatever you have collected is actually going to have the deoxygenated, the blood is going to be get oxygenated. Then this oxygenated blood will enter into the capillaries, and then it is actually going to reach to the different parts of the body. So what is the disadvantage? When you have the single two-chambered heart, there will be always a mixing of the blood, right? Remember that we have the two different types of blood. The blood what we are receiving from the body is actually a dirty blood, and the blood what you are throwing into the gill capillaries are the oxygenated blood, right? So because of this, there will be a mixing of the blood, and that is a major issue with the two-chambered heart. So to avoid that, the organisms have evolved, and that's how they are actually started having the three-chambered heart. So in a three-chambered heart, we have the separate atria which allows the some separation of the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood, which was an advantage for the land organisms. For example, the reptiles and the amphibians. So you have the two atria chambers, two chambers in the atria, and you actually have the single ventricle. So through the blood can mix in the ventricles, the mixing is minimized. Some reptiles have the partial separation of the ventricle. So in some of the reptiles, we still can have the four-chambered, or we can say that the pseudo four-chambered heart. Okay, because there the ventricle is also being partially been separated from the each other. So you have the two auricles and one ventricle. So this is what you see here is we have the two auricles and the single ventricle. So it still there is a mixing of the blood when it is going to enter into the ventricles, but it still it is going to be minimized. Then we enters into the another which is called as the four chambered heart. So the four chambered heart is the most developed heart, and that is present into the higher vertebrates such as the birds and the mammals, and it allows the complete separation of the oxygenated as well as the deoxygenated blood, because it has the two auricles or atria and the two ventricles. Okay, so because of that, it is will not have any kind of mixing of the oxygenated as well as the deoxygenated blood. So you have the two atria like this one and this one, and then you also have the two ventricles on this and that. So the complete separation is necessary to support a fast metabolism which is found in the homeotherms. So most of these organisms which actually have the four chambered heart are the homeotherm or the warm blood animals. Now, what is the advantage of the four chambered heart? What is the major advantage of a four chambered heart is that four chambered heart is actually act as the two pumps. Okay, so it's not a single pump, it is actually can be further divided into the two pumps. So for example, you can have the atria. When the atria is going to contract, it forces the liquid or the blood into the ventricle. So this is going to enter into the ventricle. So this is the ventricle, this is the atria. Then when the atria contract, it wards the blood through the arteries to the lungs and the rest of the body. So when the atria is going to contract, it is either going to throw the blood into the rest of the body, or it will also going to throw the blood into the lungs for the purifications. And then again the cycle will continue, right? Then the cycle end as the heart relaxes. So that time it is actually going to start filling the liquid from the rest of the body or from the lungs. So that's how you can actually will say that in the four chambered heart you have actually made the two different pumps. You have made a pump which is related to the atria, so where you can have the flexibility of making a contraction as well as the relaxation of the atria, or you can also have the pump where you can have the contraction and the relaxation of the ventricle, and that's how a four chamber heart is a two pumps. So that's how you can actually be able to coordinate the both the functions, like the filling of the liquid and as well as the releasing of the liquid can be separated from each other. Now, when we talk about the vertebrate heart, the vertebrate heart has separated into the two different types of chambers. We can have the atria or the atrium, which is a singular form, which receives the blood from the body or the lungs, and the contraction of the atria send the blood through a valve into the ventricles. Then we have the ventricles, which receives the blood from the atria, and contraction to the ventricles are going to send the blood to the body, so that it can actually will going to give the oxygenated blood into the body, or it is actually going to give the blood into the lungs, because that blood is going to be deoxygenated. So what you see here is the complete structure of the heart, right? Where you have the aorta. So all the thick blood vessels are called as the aorta. So we have the aorta which is actually being connected into the heart, and that's going to supply the blood to the different parts of the body. So initially you require wide pump, wide tubing, right? And then you can also have the different types of arteries. You can have the pulmonary artery, which is going to supply the blood to the right lungs, and then you also have the pulmonary artery which is going to supply the blood to the left or right lungs. And then you also going to have the pulmonary veins which are actually going to carry the oxygenated blood. Then we have the right atrium. So we have seen, right, we have the right atrium, and you also have the right ventricles and as well as the left ventricle. So these are the two chambers. And then you also have the descending aorta. So that descending aorta is actually going to be connected into the ventricles, and that is going to supply the blood to the lower part of the body. And then the heart is going to be made up of the heart muscles. And remember, that the heart muscles are going to contract and relax, right? And they are very hard muscles, so they are actually going to be very efficient. And then we also have the inferior vena cava, and we also have the valve, which is actually going to regulate the entry of the blood from the atria to the ventricles, and that valve is called as the atrioventricular valves. Okay, so what you see here is that we have the atrioventricular valve here, we also have the atrioventricular valve here. So that is actually going to regulate the supply or the regulation of the blood entry into the ventricles. And apart from that, we also have the semilunar valves and all that. Okay, now when the heart is going to contract and relax, it is actually going to make the sound, right? And that sound is called as the heart beat, right? So when you are actually going to have the one round of contraction and the one round of relaxation, that is going to constitute for the one heartbeat. So heartbeat and the contractions. So you are actually going to have the different types of the neuromuscular junctions, and these neuromuscular junctions are going to give the signal to the different parts of the heart muscles, and that's how they are actually going to have the contractions. So the sinoatrial node, which is a nervous tissue, is a nervous tissue that regulates the heartbeat, and that is actually going to give the signal to the heart for the beating, right? Beating means it is going to contract and relax. The sinoatrial node causes the atria to contract and send the signal to the atrioventricular node to the signal the ventricular to contract. So you actually, apart from the sinoatrial node, you also going to have the atrioventricular node, and atrioventricular node is going to give the signal to the ventricles, and that's how there will be a coordination between the sinoatrial node and as well as the atrioventricular node, so that there will be a contraction of the auricles and that there will be a contraction of the ventricles in a coordination. Okay, and because of that the heart is going to beat, and you know that heart is going to beat in a normal human being. You are actually going to have the 72 beats per minute. Okay, which means that is the number of times the heart is going to contract and relax in a normal human being. It actually can go up, or it actually also can go down under the unusual circumstances, right? And thus are responsible for the different types of diseases into the human being. Okay, now, so we have discussed about the circulatory system. We are in a circulatory system, we are discussing about the heart, right? So far we have discussed about the heart. Now we are going to start discussing about the pipe or the blood vessels, and the third component is the blood or the fluid. Okay, so let's discussing about the blood vessels. Blood vessels which are going to serve the purpose of the pipe, right? So the blood vessels. The blood vessels are fall into the three major classes. Arteries and the arterioles carry the blood away from the heart. Okay. Then we have the veins and the venules which carry the blood to the heart, and capillaries which are allowing the exchange of the nutrients, waste and the gases. So heart, arteries and the arterioles are actually going to carry the blood from the heart to the different part of the body, and different part of the body, and they are actually going to carry the oxygenated blood, right? Uh, there are exceptions, so that we discuss later on anyway. Then we have the veins and the venules which are actually going to carry the blood from the different part of the body to the heart. So to the heart, right? And they are actually mostly been going to carry the deoxygenated blood, which means the veins are actually going to carry the deoxygenated blood, the arteries are going to carry the oxygenated blood. And since the arteries and the arterioles carry the blood away from the heart, they are more deeper into the body compared to the veins and the venules, which are actually going to be present closer to the blood vessels. For example, the artery, what you for example, the blood vessels what you see here, which actually normally the doctors are used to count the pulse, is actually not a artery, it is actually a vein what you see. So the pulse rate when you go to the clinics and the doctor is trying to see the pulse, that pulse, what the veins what they use is actually a veins, actually they are not the arteries. So arteries are mostly being deeper into the body compared to the veins. And the capillaries are actually going to be the thin walled and the narrow diameter blood vessels, which are actually going to be responsible for the exchange of the nutrients, waste, and as well as the gases from the different parts of the body. Now, the arteries are the thick walled and they are lined with the smooth muscles. Okay. So remember that arteries are actually going to carry the blood from the heart to the different parts of the body. Okay. And because of that, the blood is actually going to carry at a very high pressure. Okay, because the heart is pumping the blood into the arteries. Okay, and because of that, the pressure is going to be very high in the arteries, and because of that the arteries walls are very thick and they are lined with the smooth muscles. uh, and this is what is going to explain that how the structure of the artery is actually explaining its function, right? So these are the different types of arteries. You have the arteries and the veins which are communicating with each other by the capillary bud. So what you see here is that the oxygenated blood is actually traveling into the arteries and the deoxygenated blood is carrying into the blood vessels, and then you are actually going to have the network of capillaries which are actually going to take away the deoxygenated blood or going to give the oxygenated blood or the nutrients to the different parts of the body. Then we have the arterioles. So arterioles are branch off to the arteries, right? And arterioles can constrict through direct and control the blood flow. They may be, for example, increase or decrease the blood supply to the skin. Okay. Then we have the another part which is called as the capillaries. So the body tissue contain a vast network of the thin capillaries, and these thin capillaries are responsible for the exchange of the nutrients and as well as the exchange of gases. Capillary walls are only one cell thick and they allow the exchange of the gases, nutrient and as well as the waste material. And the capillaries are so fine that the RBC must line up the single file to go through them. So capillaries are actually very thin, and because of that the blood vessels like the RBCs has to travel like a single line. Then only they can be able to reach to the last part of the capillaries, and that's how they can be able to give away the oxygen and they can actually be able to take up the carbon dioxide. Now, apart from this, we can also have the veins. Okay, so veins have the thinner wall than the arteries, and the reason is that the vein is actually going to carry the blood from the body to the heart. Okay, so when the heart is actually going through the relaxation mode, it is actually going to collect the blood from the heart, and because of that, it is actually going to operate on a low pressure. Okay, so when it is operating at a low pressure, it does not require a very sturdy blood vessels, and because of that the veins are actually of thin walls, and because it is thin walled, that's how the doctors are using this particular vein for detecting or counting the heartbeat, because it is easy to do that. Veins have the fewer smooth muscle cells, but they do have the walls, right? So the flow of the blood into the arteries or the veins are always being regulated by the walls. And these walls, the function, what is the function of these walls? That they are actually going to be present like this. Okay, so once the blood is entering, it is going to allow the unidirectional motion, so it should not allow the reversal of the blood. Okay, so because if there will be a reversal, these walls will come together, and that's how they are actually going to close. And these walls, and when sometimes these walls or the defect in these walls are actually been responsible for the different types of diseases. Uh, Then we have the venules. So venules are the thin-walled collectors of the blood. Low pressure in the venule allow the capillary bed to be drained to them. Okay. So what we have discussed so far, we have discussed about the different component of the circulatory system, right? We have discussed about the heart. We have discussed about the blood vessels, or and we have now left with discussing with the fluid like the blood. Okay, so what we have discussed in today's lecture is that we have discussed about the structure and the function of the heart. So within the heart, we have discussed that we have the two-chambered heart, we have the three-chambered heart, we have the four-chambered heart. What is the disadvantage and what is the advantage of the different types of heart, and how this four-chambered heart is a advantageous for the different types of for the vertebrates, especially the birds and as well as the higher mammals, and how the different components are present into the four-chambered heart. So we have the two auricles and two ventricles, and all these auricle and ventricles are being present, and what are different types of walls are present. And then we also discuss about how the nervous system is actually regulating the contraction and the relaxation of the heart, and how it is actually regulating the heartbeat. Apart from that, we also discuss about the different types of blood vessels. So we discuss about the arteries, we have discussed about the vessels or the veins, we have discussed about the capillaries, and the different properties of these blood vessels and what are their functions. And now in our subsequent lecture, we are going to discuss about the blood and its component and what are the different functions of these components. So with this, I would like to conclude my lecture here. In our subsequent lecture, we are going to discuss about the blood and its component and how they are actually going to function into how they are actually performing the different types of functions. Thank you.